Life is complex.
So is our mental health. It cannot be understood by diagnosis alone.
Our philosophy is treat the person, not the mental illness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humanizing Mental Health. I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
And I'm Trent Akers.
And we're joined today by Patrick Mirando. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy, Trent. Nice to meet you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to meet you too.
So today we're going to be talking about something that I think is actually very important. There's some common themes that happen in our podcast, and we have talked often about the notion of integration of self. And one of the things that people struggle with within the context of therapy is they feel like they need to fight something, and in so doing, there's this inner conflict that can become a problem, and so we want to speak more to this idea that your mind is not your enemy. So, Patrick, if you wouldn't mind kind of at first giving us a bit about you, about how you came to build into the philosophy that you hold.
Yeah, so overall, I'm a psychologist and a spiritual teacher, and so I started straight from school. I went into psychology and studied that from I think about 18 years old, and so my mind was very logical and very psychologically minded, I guess I'll say. And then from there, I started doing a martial arts. I started doing Kung Fu. And from Kung Fu, I started learning about chi energy, chakras, auras, and spirituality. That's where I started that journey. And then I just couldn't help but see the similarities between them. And I just sort of started amalgamating them myself. And so for me, spirituality is about wholeness and understanding that we're a whole, we're everything, we're a part of all. And psychology is obviously our mind, but also how do I integrate all of my mind as part of me, not just separate some parts and say, no, I'm going to fight that part and keep that part. So it's like, how do we integrate all of it as part of the whole?
Interesting. Right when you bring that up, I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I instantly just jumped into the idea of interpersonal neurobiology, in the sense that, like from that perspective, we don't just have one brain in our heads, but we have like neurons literally running throughout our body. And like, really, it's about, like you say, their full integration through everything. So I absolutely love that. And I'm curious, because you said you worked with martial arts. I'm wondering how doing that and working with chi energy and stuff like that has impacted or really helped to grow your perspective in your work as a psychologist.
Yeah, so I think overall that I think it just gave me a more holistic view of psychology rather than just purely the mind and emotions. I think it's helped me view like the energy parts of our body. Part of the spirituality, I also went into studying like Buddhism, non-dualism, New Age philosophies. So I kind of went down a whole spiritual path as well, not just sticking with Kung Fu. And really what that helped determine, and it is in psychology, I guess Freud might describe it similarly, but I kind of look at things like, there's our true self, which is how we live from our soul or our spirit. So there's our mind, and then there's our body. And so we have sort of those three components of us, and understanding how they work together and integrate them to live our life of harmony and peace.
Yeah, as you describe this, something that really jumps out of me and that I had been thinking about the last while is that spirituality seems to be actually almost fundamentally part of what psychology is attempting to describe. Like, what I mean by that is there's like a psycho-spiritual kind of theme within the way people begin to understand who humans are, how they function. Even when you look at something like dialectical behavior therapy, they've basically taken the techniques from this practice and then they've placed it into like a secular realm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting that you bring that up, Jeremy, because usually whenever I introduce like the idea of a dialectic to a lot of my clients, we usually end up talking about the Serenity Prayer and about the idea for wisdom, which of course is where like the idea of the wise mind comes from. So yeah, that's a really good point.
So it seems like a natural blending for you, Patrick, and I'm very much so interested in that process of how you blend the spirituality and the psychology together.
So I think when we talk about, say, the wise mind, that's one way to call it. Some people call it Buddha nature. I call it the true self. So whatever it is, that's what I call the soul or the spirit. And when we live from that perspective, that's a place already of peace and well-being. So when we live from that, we generally will have peace with whatever's going on in our lives, within ourselves. And so I kind of think of that as our North Star. And anytime we're suffering or struggling, it's usually our mind is disconnected from the perspective of our North Star. And so I really work on understanding and helping people understand is how they're perceiving things in a way that's actually creating trouble for them and disconnecting themselves from their peace or from their natural state of peace.
Yeah, as you bring that up, like that instantly makes me think of so many clients that, like the idea of, like basically getting them to, even just like sit peacefully in a room without going through rumination or really tapping into those five senses because, not like feeling that sense of disconnection.
That's right. And often say something like rumination. Rumination is usually designed as our thinking pattern to try to solve an emotion that we're feeling. So if I'm feeling maybe sad or hurt or angry, then I'm likely to ruminate it to try to find an answer. But if I'm okay not having an answer and then being okay with the emotion, then I'm less likely to ruminate. So my mind's trying to help me, but it's not actually helping in this scenario.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
instead of fighting it, then what becomes the answer?
Well, one of the answers would be firstly saying, what emotion am I trying to solve through ruminating? So it might be, so say if someone hurts me, I might think about it a lot. So, but if I'm okay to feel hurt without trying to understand it, then I'm less likely to have to get stuck in ruminating. So in that case, if I can't understand it, I might have to just be, okay, yes, I do feel hurt, and I'm willing to move beyond the hurt. And sometimes it's, can I make peace with the hurt, not just feel peace with the absence of any pain?
I love that. I love that. I think it like really, because I think that's sometimes, like you can't, I think a lot of clients, like you say, try to understand it, try to intellectualize it, but like really, it comes down to, on some level, it's about just accepting it for what it is. And it's about trying to I can almost hear, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it's almost kind of like backing up and just sort of like seeing it within the larger, grander scheme and trying not to give over so much of your power to it. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So we don't want to have to give so much. Like it's okay to feel the pain and the hurt, but it's okay also to not have to solve it. It's okay not to get controlled by it, not to lose our lives because I feel that.
Mm.
And also recognizing that hurt is an opportunity. Hurt is an opportunity in this case to say, well, no, I don't want that person in my life, or to set boundaries to teach them what you want and don't want for yourself.
Yeah, it's really through pain and restriction, almost like the idea of, I mean, maybe this is a bit of a trite saying, but it's like how do you form a diamond, through pressure and through struggle, and it's really that restriction and that struggle that can really help to form you into who you are and to crystallize, your sense of self, or crystallize who you are as a person.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of see that as the more we go through that pressure, the more we can stand as our true self without getting carried away by that pressure. So the pressure itself, while it can sweep us away from ourselves, the more we can learn to stand strong in that, or stand strong in the storm, I guess, the less the outside world then affects us, and the more strong we can stand within our truth.
Yeah.
I might be wrong
One of the
here.
things that really jumps out to me, you go ahead, Dren.
No, please, Jeremy.
So one of the things that stands out to me, something that recently came to my awareness, and that is studying individuals that have a post-traumatic stress disorder, and the length of time that someone may experience the distress. Because I've seen lots of people heal and come to a place where they don't experience the degree of distress anymore. But one of the troubles within the current modalities of therapy is that we're just trying to turn off the feeling. And I'm not saying that these therapies are necessarily bad, like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The desensitization, well, are we removing the struggle? Is that what the person is looking for, is for the struggle to be removed? Because it's actually through the struggle that we grow, that we build,
Mm-hmm.
and that potentially, if we just try to remove the struggle and we do so especially early in the process, then the person doesn't actually rebuild from the injury. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
left actually with long-standing symptoms well after one might have been able to diminish or even resolve them. And it sounds like that's what you're pointing at too, that we don't need to escape from the struggle.
Yeah, no. Well, the struggle is, so I guess I sort of verbalize it a little bit different. So I kind of say there's the pain and then there's the struggle with the pain. And so a lot of times with PTSD, a lot of times what I found anecdotally, but a lot of times people with PTSD aren't usually very good at being okay to feel their emotions. They usually can be quite avoidant. And then when particularly not just a trauma, but a trauma generally
Mm-hmm.
creates more extreme emotions than just a normal event. So if I'm avoidant plus I have more extreme emotions, it's likely to overwhelm me. So sometimes how I work with it, I work with just teaching them how to be okay with certain emotions because the emotions are normal responses to the event. And how I see it is our body wants to
Mm-hmm.
process those emotions. It doesn't want to hold on to them from that event. So being okay to feel them means we feel the pain out. And then we can still take the lessons from it and the growth from it and the opportunities as we move forward, but we just have more tools to manage emotions as we go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe I'm broadening it out here a little bit too much, but I mean, if you really look at Western society in general, like the whole idea of, like having to forego pain, like in some ways, like we always try, especially with kids, like one thing that people want to talk about so much is how do you build resiliency in children? But the thing is that in order for them to have resiliency, they need to be able to have the struggle, whereas you can't always just, make every single playground, have issues or basically not have where every conflict is resolved perfectly. Sometimes you need to be able to sit in that distress and realize sometimes that you know what, not everybody is going to like you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we actually won't grow at all if everything's sort of rainbows and butterflies. And it actually won't be useful
Hmm.
for our lives because the life does have some harsh components. I'm not saying
Hmm.
life is all great all the time. So there is going to be pain in life. Pain is a natural part. And if you don't know how to navigate your pain, you're going to crumble. So if you have no adverse
Hmm.
events growing up, and it's very hard to have no adverse events, but generally if you have minimal, you're going to have way less strategies to survive the greater world when you're older.
You know what? That I never thought about it because the minute that you bring up like the whole idea of adverse events, because that's almost something in some ways, that we clinicalize, that we look at as like a diagnosis is adverse child events. Where does that go from something that is actually hampering our mental health at times to adversity that actually bolsters it?
Well, me personally, I look at all adversity as an opportunity to bolster. So whatever the childhood event may be, it could be that say I grew up in a domestic violence household. Like that's terrible, obviously. But in that, what I would maybe have learned, I would have learned how to be
Mm,
very good at reading people, would be very good at knowing to set expectations, very good at kind of knowing how to please people. So that'd be tools that would be useful to learn from that environment. So what we want to do though, we want to process those emotions, but also recognize that now it's okay to please myself. Now it's okay to not have to read others and tune into me. So we also want to learn the opposite end from what we learnt through the childhood experiences or the adverse events. So the adverse events are opportunities to build qualities. Our
mhm,
job sometimes as adults is to build the opposite end that we haven't learned from those experiences.
mm,
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, and kind of tying in what both of you said together, my reflections were like, we have all of this data from the ACE studies, and if the idea is that we need to bubble wrap children, wow, that would be a problem. Like, there's all this data that shows higher rates of whatever you want to really point at. Actually, the rates of all sorts of things are worse with high ACE scores. Having said that, it reminds me of a piece of research that we talked about some time ago that was in a biosphere, and the trees in this biosphere grew really fast, and then they fell over.
mm,
And they
mhm,
fell over because there was no wind, and the
mhm,
wind. is required for the trees to be able to build the hard wood, not just the roots, but actually the hard wood that stabilizes the tree. And so recognizing that actually this world has never been rainbows and butterflies, and it's not even a reasonable goal, but that we need adversity as part of what builds our hard wood, our strength.
Completely. Yeah, and I guess a tree with too much hard wood will break. So that's when there's like when it's too rigid, but also if it's too flimsy, then it will snap and fall as well. So
Mhm,
it's about trying to find that balance, I guess. And
mhm.
it's very hard to find. Like there's no exact balance, but the more we can try to find that balance, which means enough pain, but not too much pain to break or to make it so hard to grow back again.
Yeah, in fact, very interesting as you describe that, because what happens for us when we have someone present in our room, they they're already, at least for the most part, we're working with adults. Certainly that's what I'm speaking to, is the adult population, is their history or their foundation is well into their past. And often, people they don't like to go back and talk about those things. Now, maybe they don't have to, and I certainly wouldn't say that someone has to. But at the same time, what we're looking for is we're looking for the parts of their story that they don't understand, a way in which they can look at and see, like you said, the fundamental growth that is already there, and the ways in which then they can learn the part that they didn't learn.
Yeah. And part of learning that part is, and part of why people don't like looking back is they actually don't like to feel the emotion of what was there. And there's a time and a place where feeling it is useful to process it, but that some people get stuck in feeling it, which is also not useful. So even that is our mind's attempt at
Mhm.
trying not to feel bad, but sometimes we have to be okay to process that emotion so we can move on from it also.
In fact, could you speak to that more when you talk about that piece around, it's like, hey, we could, the appropriateness of feeling it to process it, the problem of getting stuck in it.
Yeah, so it might be just to say going back, and I might think of, just go back to feeling very hurt or belittled from a family member growing up, or feeling victimized. So part of that is, can I grieve some of that feeling? That would generally create a lot of sadness. And normally, as children, when we experience that, we just sort of move on. So we carry the sadness with us, but we just move on with our lives, and it sort of gets buried deeper and deeper. So while it gets buried, it doesn't not get triggered. So we get triggered very easily with different things that might simulate what was similar in the past. So the more we can go back to grieve some of that, so say, yeah, that was sad, and I'm okay to grieve that out, the less likely I'm carrying it forward, and the less pain I have in me now as an adult. Part of the problem, if I go into, say, grieving sadness, I might grieve the sadness, but then in my thinking pattern, my mind might start saying things like, "It wasn't fair. They shouldn't have done that. How dare they? Why me? Poor me that I experienced that." So then our thinking patterns within that can actually keep us stuck deeper and deeper, not actually process it in a healthy way.
Yes, of course, that makes total sense. It's almost, to me, it's almost like an archaeologist that is carefully using the tools, piecing away, seeing the layers of of what is there, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that like whenever I've gone back with people, like where we've gone back and looking at older parts, older pieces, it's always about trying to deal with that with the greatest care. And and I think on one level, like one thing that I've talked to a lot of clients with whenever I do parts work, like one of the major things is about showing gratitude for those parts, showing gratitude for those experiences, because it's almost kind of like, at risk of mixing metaphors, but it's almost like, we want, it's like almost like pulling like a thread out of a rug that we don't like. The more that you pull that thread out, how much of those experiences, if you didn't have that, or if you put in a happier experience, would fundamentally alter who you were. Maybe you didn't like that you didn't get into grad school that first year, but because you reapplied the next year, got in. Maybe there were other things, you met other people. Maybe you had a better work ethic than if you would have just had everything handed to you on a silver plate.
Yeah, completely. So really the lessons we got and the growth opportunities we had from the adversity or from and again we could look at it as adversity, but I think even calling it adversity is very narrow. So if you look at it like just like you mentioned on the grander picture is
Mm,
actually something like something pleasant in disguise. So it's moving towards something greater if you take something from it.
yeah. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, like I really like that idea of like really zooming out. It's kind of almost like doing like one time one question that I really love to ask people is that sometimes like with some things that are just distressing in the moment, if you look at this from your ninth birthday, if I were to come to you, magically transport myself today to your ninth birthday and ask you, do you remember that distressing event from 50 years ago? Where you were worried about this or worried about that, how much distress is that causing you now? What would that
That's fantastic
and
because
most of the time they
what
go,
often happens when we
yeah.
sorry. Yeah. So what often happens, like just what you're saying, is that when we're in the emotion, we kind of catastrophize the emotion itself. And when we go to, to the 99-year-old self and says, well,
Mhm.
actually, that emotion was really tiny in the grand scheme of my whole life.
Jeremy, you've got a bit of a smirk there, dude. I'm curious. What's coming up for you right now as you're kind of like sitting back and listening to Patrick and I talk here? I'm curious. What are you chewing on, pal?
Well, honestly, what I was thinking is the number of people that would benefit from this message, that would be able to go, we get stuck into a place in which we get disempowered and we feel like a victim. And I'm certainly not talking about fault. I'm not saying what happened to somebody was their fault because that's simply not true. It wasn't most of the time that something happens and we truly are have something that happens to us and it's not fair and in that circumstance we're a
Mm,
victim. But when we move into the next day and the day after that and the day after that, then if we're coming from a place of everything was conspiring against me,
mm,
then we get locked into a loss of power in like our whole life, and that moment starts to define a much bigger essence than what it truly is.
mhm,
And I can see even
mhm,
as I say this, Patrick, I can see you nodding. And this actually to me makes sense to be able to then push into the shameless plug, right?
Yeah.
We got to do it. We got to
yeah,
do a
yeah,
shameless plug.
yeah.
So
It's kind of our
so
thing.
Patrick, I understand that you've created a book,
Yes.
and we'd like for you to tell our readers about the book and what they can anticipate the finding within those pages.
Yeah, so my book's called Waking Up to Yourself, and it's a book about combining living your truth by combining psychology and spirituality. So within that you'll learn how to connect to your truth,
Mhm,
how to
mhm,
understand your mind and how to utilize it to help you, but also how to know how to drop it when it doesn't help you, and also how to understand your emotions and your responses so that they don't get in the way of living your truth. So overall, for me, like
mhm,
living my truth and living from my place of peace is my greatest goal for me, and it's also been my greatest, I guess, achievement to the level I've attained. I'm sure there's more to go. So for me, just seeing how many other people struggled, that's what really motivated me to write that. So that's why I've written that. I've also got a website, patrickmirando.com, where I have meditations and offer sessions as well to help people with the same thing.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to point out, this happened off camera, and it's really important, and that is in terms of people that are looking at connecting for with Patrick, when you're looking at that spirituality growth and so forth, that he can work with people across the globe, because this is working within an area of practice that is not defined by the psychological society. For those that are looking for direct psychological care, then of course that's within your licensing area. But I want to make sure that people know that if they're looking for help, that you can serve people globally.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So like I generally utilize a bit of psychology in that, but I keep my psychology practice only for Sydney, Australia, where I'm in now, or New South Wales.
So then tell us about what you offer within your website that would be kind of the structure and how what people would be able to do and use within that context.
Yeah, so within the website, what I offer is I've got particularly got a meditation subscription. So some meditations are designed for a mindful meditation, so to help us just be more present and be more aware. Then there's meditations designed to help us awaken more to our true self, to be able to have more connection to that part of our being. Then I also have some I guess more energy and sound healing meditations on there, just for people who just prefer to listen and just allow the energy to do the work itself, to release some of the past energies without having to consciously do that. Sometimes we do that through imagination, and that can make it easier than doing it head on. So, and then I offer the sessions, the one-on-one sessions, like you mentioned. So generally that is just really seeing where your true self is and seeing what's keeping you away from that connection to your true self. And that's really what I work on a lot.
I'm curious, Patrick, in your work in helping people try to find their true selves, how fundamental is cultivating a sense of curiosity?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think more important than cultivating a sense of curiosity is the desire for peace. Because even like I do talk spirituality, but a lot of times not everyone resonates with spirituality, so that's not really that important. But for me, the state of peace is the most important part, and that's connected to your true self, whether you call it that or not. So if you want peace, and then curiosity, I think would come second, then, because then you'd be curious, how am I keeping myself away from this peace? What are the ways that I can find this peace again or reconnect back to it? So I think curiosity, and also I think accountability or responsibility are the other two things that are really important, because a lot of the times the things our mind is doing while it's trying to help us, it's actually causing the problem. So if we don't take responsibility for what we do and hope someone else does it for us, then we're never going to get to that place of peace.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it comes actually to bring us full circle. That that is, you don't have to fight yourself. You don't have your mind is not something that you have to fight. You actually have to find the way to be able to make peace.
Yeah. That's right. And just using your example from before, Jeremy, you mentioned like people have a victim mentality, and like some people have been victimized, so it's quite normal. And what a victim mentality alleviates us from a place of, we feel like we don't have to take responsibility. It feels relieving to not take responsibility, and it feels like a sense of compassion, like a little pat on the back, saying, "Oh, you poor thing." And so that's our mind's way of actually trying to alleviate pain for us by sitting in that mentality. But only sitting in that mentality will keep us struggling and suffering. So we want to say, yeah, that's great to do that, but I also want to take responsibility for my life moving forward from this point, because the more I pity myself, the worse I'm going to feel. But pitying does feel a little bit good initially. So it's not our mind being bad to us, it's our mind trying to soothe us in some way.
And I love what you said there, like where it's about recognizing that every once in a while, like it's good to self-soothe and to give ourselves a bit of a break, but you don't want to slip and go purely into that victim mentality. It's about where is my responsibility in this, trying to create more of a balanced perspective and a sense of ownership to some degree. Is that right?
Yeah,
Ownership, and also a sense of,
yeah, for sure.
decision making to make my life better from here. So yes, this is where I am on the path, and whatever happened got me here, but I get to choose more where I go from here. So I kind of get to write some of my own movie. I get to write some of my own script.
Yeah, actually, that like as you've been saying that, this Patrick, I think that Jeremy, you've often said, I think either to me, or I said on the show or off camera, where you've said sometimes you can't control what happens to you, but you can't control what you do with it, like the next chapter in the
Yeah,
story.
like right, for sure. Like breaking free of that, I think is so essential to be in a spot in which you're not taking responsibility for someone else's actions or for whatever happened that was outside of your control. But if life is just simply outside of your control, that's a terrible place to be. If but rather taking responsibility for what am I gonna do? Like this is still my life and it's up to me to find my way forward and to ask for the right kind of help from the right kind of people. right?
Mhm.
To form trusting relationships with people that you can be loyal to and they can be loyal to you.
Mhm.
So feels like we're kind of winding to the end. I always like to do a reflective statement on the conversation today, and actually I'll start out with that because there's some things that jumped out of me, even in the process and the language of some of the questions that I would ask or the way that I would think. I recognize that there's like an embeddedness that is part of my own programming that that creates like a process of some biases, right? Like to come
Mm.
back to the concept of peace. That's not a common thought within our
Mm.
society of finding the peace in the moment. And I think that's going to be whether the moment is difficult or not, is finding the peace in the moment, which I think is going to be my takeaway.
Yeah.
Love that. Like the one thing that really struck out to me is that whole idea of like how do we frame adversity throughout our lives and what strengths can we draw from that? What are the things that we need to learn? But then how can we learn to do maybe that for ourselves, if the opposite of those things for ourselves in the future, that there's always something that we can learn from. That adversity doesn't have to define us, but it can actually help to push us forward. What
Yeah,
about
and
for
create new
yourself,
values.
Patrick?
I think for me, and I'll just reiterate a bit about Jeremy and a bit about yours, Trent, is that finding peace is, I think, one of the most important things, but it's also important to realize that it's finding the most amount of peace you can find right in this moment. So sometimes the most amount of peace you can find is absolute rage. I'm not saying to act on that rage, but that you might have to be, can I be at peace that I'm angry right now, rather than thinking that peace is the absence of another
Mhm.
emotion. Sometimes it's peace with the emotion that we can work on. And the more we do that over and over again, that's where we really land on more peace and without needing the emotion to be there to have our peace. In terms of the adversity part,
Love it.
I really think that's really important as well. So the other thing I do as well is sometimes it's hard to appreciate some of the experiences we went through, but sometimes I use the word to respect them. So I can respect what it's done for me. I can respect how it's helped me grow, respect how it's made my life better in some regards, even though harder in some other regards. And going back to accountabilities, no matter what's happened for us, we do get the choice now about what we want to do with our life moving forward. We do get the choice to develop more skills, to seek help, to create a different reaction than the one that we've conditionally had. And that's really where our peace is. Our peace is in our choice and the direction we choose to go with that choice.
Mhm. Mhm.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Absolutely.
Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
That's a perfect place to wind up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me. It's been
All
great
right.
having you both.
You're welcome.
So on
Uh,
that note, I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
I'm Trent Nakers. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this message has been as meaningful to you as it has been to us. If you're looking for help, you can find us on Facebook at Humanizing Mental Health.